great study. Hey, I was thinking about this, and when Abraham believed, it was accounted to him as righteousness. So, we have this model that the righteousness of God is placed upon those who believe in the Lord. And as I was thinking about that, I think Joseph pointed out that this happened before Abraham, who was called Abram at that time, was not circumcised yet. And so he believed as uncircumcised. And then later, after circumcision, obviously still righteous, he became both the father of Gentile believers and Jewish believers. But I was thinking, there in Galatians it says that God preached the gospel. I mean, Abraham was responding and believing the gospel. And then I thought, what? How can that be? Hey, where is the Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection? So I made an assumption. I assumed Abraham knew nothing past Genesis 15. So somewhere between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 15, verse 6, the gospel. Abraham understood the gospel. and how many times do we see the gospel? We see it there in the garden after they sinned. Adam and Eve sinned. We have God making that sacrifice, and then taking the skins off the animals and placing them on Adam and Eve. As they tried to hide their sin, it wasn't sufficient. God had to step in and offer a sacrifice, a bloody sacrifice, and cover them with their sins. And I thought, well, okay, there's one example. I mean, Abraham knew that story. And then I thought about Noah and the ark. The ark is a picture of the gospel. As Noah and his family go into the ark, God closes it up, and God's judgment upon all the wickedness. And Noah and his family were safe inside the ark. And if you do a little word study, when it talks about how God told Noah to put pitch on the ark and to pitch it, talking about sealing the cracks so the ark wouldn't leak. Do a little word study on that, and you'll see that word for pitch is the only time it's translated like that, and it means atonement. And so Noah was surrounded by the atonement. Again, another picture pointing us to the cross. And then as God calls Abram out of his pagan culture and says, I'm going to show you a place, he leaves, he goes out, he takes Lot with him. And then Lot moves over near Sodom and Gomorrah, and some of the other wicked kings come and raid and take Lot and his family off with everybody else. And Abram pulls his guys together and says, well, I'm going to go rescue him. And which is another picture of Christ rescuing us. But after the rescue, it talks about Melchizedek, the high priest of God. He comes, and it says that there, as it talks about Melchizedek, it talks about how he sits down, and with bread and wine, he communes with Abram. And I thought, Oh, look at that. The first communion. And again, these are shadows and types, but it's pointing to the gospel. And I think Abraham was putting all of these things together. That God was going to provide a sacrifice. God was going to provide a solution to our sins. And he was going to make an atonement. And Abram believed. And God counted it as righteousness. And as he believed in that gospel, as faint, he didn't have all the details, but as faint as it was, he believed. And later on, the story gets better. After the circumcision, after Abram and Sarai try to fulfill the promise through a handmaid, that wasn't God's way. Then God makes that promise of the circumcision, and then Isaac is born. And then as we read in Genesis 22, there is a very clear picture of the gospel. As God tells Abraham, he now has a new name, to take his son, his only son, and take him up to a place that he's going to show him. And he asks that Abraham sacrifice his son. Read the story in Genesis 22. It just drips with gospel. It's a 3-day journey. Isaac carries the wood up the hill. Isaac is about ready to be sacrificed. And Isaac asked that question, Father, where's the lamb? And Abraham was able to say, God will provide. We read later on in Hebrews that Abraham thought God can raise him from the dead. But God provided a ram that was stuck in the thorns, wrapped around the ram's head. And the sacrifice was made. And he came back down. So, another picture of the gospel. But the gospel, even in those first 15 chapters of Genesis, is there. And Abraham put his faith in that gospel. And God counted it to him as righteousness.